How's everyone doing? Today's project is this Lawn Boy 2-stroke push mower, and it originally came in with a no start condition, and I diagnosed that as being a bad ignition coil. I have since replaced the ignition coil and got it running yesterday. But now the new symptoms are that the mower surges, so the RPM goes up and down, and that is pretty much a surefire sign of a clogged carburetor. So we're going to go ahead and clean out the carburetor on this guy today, and I thought I'd take you along. So first things first, you got to get the air cover off. Take out the air filter, which is in really nice shape. Next thing we're going to do is take off the top cover here. There are 3 Phillips screws. Got to take the gas cap off. Alright, so just to make it easier, there is a primer line that runs up through the gas tank here. I'm going to see if I can just pull this primer line off the primer bulb. Okay guys, so I got the top cover off, I got the primer line off. Just run this back through the tank, and I'm going to pinch off the fuel line. And now I'm going to remove the fuel line and try and capture any of the fuel, and then this whole fuel tank just comes right off. The carburetor itself is held on with 2 Phillips screws, so I'm going to take those off, and there's going to be a few gaskets that we're going to have to watch out for, which are all going to come off too. Now the biggest thing you have to worry about with these carburetors is the way this, let's see if I can get it out into the light a little better. There is a spring right here where my finger is pointing. Right here, there's a spring. It goes to this arm, and it also wraps around underneath this, basically this governor arm here. And got to be very careful of that. You can't bend that spring, you can't break this spring. It's a big pain in the butt if you do all that. So we'll just be very careful of that when we're taking this thing apart. The next thing I'm going to do is get a 5/16 socket. And we'll take this throttle cable off. There's a nut on the back. Just make sure you keep that together. Alright guys, so I removed the nut and bolt from this guy. And then there's a Z-bend on the end of this cable that just gotta work off. Now I got the carburetor detached. So I'm going to take it over to the bench here and go ahead and start cleaning this up. Now once again, there are some gaskets here guys. There's a gasket on the intake, then this sort of metal gasket. There's also a gasket on the back side of this, which I'm going to try and gingerly take off just so that I can not damage it. There we go. Okay, just keep those gaskets all together. I'll take it over to the bench. I'll bring you over there. Alright guys, I got you up on my bench here. What I'm going to do first when I'm working on these things, just because I don't want to mess with the spring that we were talking about earlier, is I'm going to take a couple of nuts here and attach them here to the end of these bolts that go through the air filter or housing and the carburetor, just to kind of keep it all together as one piece. You could take the carburetor off altogether if you had to, but again, what I caution you on is the spring. Alright, so once I got that those two nuts on, they don't have to be super tight, just tight enough that it keeps this all together. I'm going to flip this upside down now, and I'm going to access the float bolt with a couple of Phillips screws. All the fuel is actually running out of the pan here. And into my tray. Try to work with the tray. And there it goes. It's supposed to come out the bottom side of the bowl there. Just loosen all those off. It looks like I can break them all. So you loosen all those off. Take the bowl off. Now there is a gasket here. And just check the condition of that bowl gasket. Mine looks in really nice condition. And then they have a cork float. Here is a screen for your main jet. So you're going to want to check for debris and gunk and stuff. I'm going to clean all that off before I reassemble. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take out this main jet. Also, I'm going to take off this float. And underneath here is going to be your needle and seat. So take off the float pin. Cork float. And here's your needle. Now, it has a rubber tip on it, and you're kind of just looking for deformations and ring. It looks like mine does have a bit of a ring there, so I'm going to want to check that out, pressure test all that when I put it back together. So here's your seat, and then here's a main jet and an emulsion tube right in here. So I'm going to take all this apart next. Nice wide flathead screwdriver. And this is a brass jet, so it'll strip pretty easily, so just make sure you have a proper size screwdriver. There's a bit of a washer underneath there, so that's a brass washer, so don't lose that. And then your main emulsion, or your main jet, is right in here. You're gonna have to get a really little tiny screwdriver to get that guy out. Okay, so much like the Hondas and the Kohlers and the Cub Cadets and anything with one of these sort of Honda knockoff carburetors, all of these are going to have little holes that you're going to want to make sure are clean before you put this all back together. And actually mine looks actually really nice. So I'm going to poke through all these holes anyways, just to make sure. And and I'm going to take out this the seat as well. I like the fact that these have screw-in seats. On the Hondas, they are press fit in there, so I don't like that. Just replacing them becomes difficult. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spray some carb cleaner in and around here, any little passageways, holes, orifices. I'm going to go ahead and spray some carb cleaner, clean out all these little jets, and then I'll come back and reassemble after I've done all that. Alright guys, so I got the carburetor all put back together after cleaning it up. Just going to go ahead and spin off those nuts now because I don't need those anymore. And we'll be all set to go ahead and put this back on the machine. Alright guys, so here comes the tricky part. You gotta kind of put a bunch of different components back together all at the same time. So what I'm gonna do is first I'm going to put our throttle cable back on. At least hook up the linkage. I don't have to do up the nut and the bolt just yet. And then put on all my gaskets. Alright, line all that up. But first thing you do, you got to get this little governor arm up, and underneath there's a slot underneath here to try and get that on. So you have to kind of put it up and in there on an angle into that slot. There we go. And failure. Get it up and in there. Get it all lined up. Then I'll try and get this guy back in. Just tilt it down a bit on an angle. Fit this air filter housing up into that slot. And there we go. Now, I'm just going to try and get these Phillips screws in by hand, get them started by hand. Okay, so that's that. Now I can go ahead and tighten these down. And again, it's all plastic, guys, so not overly tight. We don't want to snap any of this plastic stuff off, but just snug. Okay, double check everything. So that's good. My governor arm is good and free. That's hooked up. Now what I need to do is go ahead and reinstall this throttle cable. And once again, there's a nut and a bolt for that. What I'll do is bring you around this other side. I'll show you how to do that. Alright guys, to reattach this cable properly, your throttle cable, what you're going to do is follow it up here to the throttle control, and you're going to make sure it's on the choke setting, so all the way down. And then from here you're going to put that cable on, but it has a slot. You can see there's a slot there to be able to adjust that this way and that way. So what you're looking for is on inside there, the butterfly valve. You're going to make sure it's all the way closed. That's in the choke position. So once that's in the fully closed position and you can't push it over anymore, just hold it there and then do up your nut and your bolt. Alright, once that's all tightened down, then you can just test your throttle. Okay, mine seems to be going back and forth properly. The butterfly valve's opening and closing. I'm going to spray some lubrication all in this track here for the throttle. And that will increase the longevity of that. Alright, and that seems to be operating the way I want it to. Alright guys, next thing we're going to do is put the gas tank back on. It just sits on in place here. We're going to put the primer line back up through the gas tank. We're going to hook up the fuel line. And I'm going to undo this fuel line clamp, allow some fuel to flow into the carburetor. We're going to check for leaks. While I'm letting that carburetor float bowl fill up, I'm going to go ahead and put on the top cover here now. I'm going to hook up our primer line. Primer line's back on. Fuel gas cap. Alright guys, so top cover's on, fuel cap's back on. Just gonna put in my 3 Phillips screws. And we'll be ready to test this, hopefully. She is all good.